So I wanted to talk about unleveling the playing field and basically answer a question that I hear quite frequently at conferences now, which is how can digital marketers still beat their competitors when everybody's basically using the same automation, the automation that Google and the engines give us? So who am I to talk about that? Well, my name is Frederick Vallaeys. I was one of the first 500 people who joined Google to help build Google AdWords. I'm originally from Belgium, so I speak Dutch. So I was helping them translate AdWords into its 6th language at the time. And this was way back when in 2002. After Google, I left Google and I started a different company, Optmyzr. And so for the last 7 years, we've been building tools to help PPC marketers be more efficient. And so in really more than 20 years now, I've been very close to PPC, seeing a lot of the change that we've had over the years. It's been very fascinating. And I wrote a book on that topic. So it's called Digital Marketing in an AI World. And we'll cover some of the themes from that book here today. My video is looking a little weird right now. I don't know if that's coming through on your side as well. But if I need to do anything, Mehmet, just let me know. Anyway, I thought we would start really with, and actually backing up, okay? So agenda-wise, I want to talk about 3 things that I think we can all believe in to sort of set the level for this session. And then towards the end, I'm going to have about 5 very specific tactics that you can use to beat your competitors. So stick around for those. But anyway, before we go into that, I wanted to lay out 3 things that I hope we can all believe are true. And the reason why we're even talking about a session where we have to worry about how will we outsmart our competitors. So really the first truth that I hope we can all agree on is that the ad platforms will continue to automate. So basically we have this ongoing wave, or an avalanche in this case, and it's basically unstoppable, right? So don't even think about trying to stop automation or not use automation, because it's just going to keep coming and coming. So why is automation continuously growing? Well, first of all, it's really because Google and the engines, they can. If you think about artificial intelligence, it's not a new concept. It's been around since the 1950s, but the problem was that machines and technology and computers often just weren't fast enough to do a good job with artificial intelligence and machine learning. And so if you look at this curve here, all the way in the beginning in the 1950s, there's a little bit of blue at that bottom, and that blue represents the speed of computers at that time. And due to Moore's law, every 18 months, roughly, that computing speed is doubling. And so every 18 months on this bar, you can see the blue growing. Actually, you can't see the blue growing because it's so tiny, right? So it takes all the way until 2003 before it shows up on this spectrum, on the scale that we have here. And so it's this constant doubling that's made computing power so massive. So after this having happened for 50 to 60 years, we're at that point where now the machines are really in a position they can do amazing things. By the way, the machines could do amazing things, but only because we also have a tremendous amount of data. So there's been a huge amount in data growth. And obviously, Google saves data from every auction, every search that happens. And you put those 2 together, and all of a sudden, guess what? All of these engineers at Google, they're excited because they can finally do something with automation. Okay, but we all know engineers love to build things because they can. But the business people, so the business people over at Google, they also decide to do it because it creates real value. So I was on the quality score team at Google when quality score was introduced. And really one of the reasons for quality score was that it was a predictive mechanism to help Google know which of the ads would get a click. And keep in mind, Google is a cost per click advertising system. So I can bid $1,000 for a click, but if nobody clicks on the ad, Google makes no money. So Google was highly incentivized to make sure that they would show ads that were relevant enough so that somebody would actually click and Google would make the money from that click. And so that's where in the beginning it was click-through rate, and then it became predicted click-through rate, and eventually it became quality score. Quality score is really the original machine learning system within Google Ads. And they've been doing it for a really, really long time. And they do it because it creates tremendous value. And it also, by the way, creates a sustainable system, right? We as advertisers, we love being on Google Ads because we find new business out of it. It helps us grow our businesses. And Google likes to do it because they make money, right? So it's an ecosystem where everybody's happy. And automation and machine learning is driving a lot of that. Anyway, so besides the fact that the engineers can build it, business people think this is good for Google, the automation will obviously continue. But there is actually also been the downside, right? The downside is that a lot of the automation that we see from the engines is very specific. And so, as you can see here, the automation that the engines put in fixes very small, narrow problems. So you maybe have smart bidding, which fixes bidding. You have RSAs, which fixes ad text automation. And so none of these are really comprehensive solutions. And so that's one of the ways that we're still going to be able to add value, because we have to pick and choose from a lot of these individual, narrowly scoped artificial intelligences. Now, the second thing that I hope we can all believe in is that data is taken away. And if we don't just believe in it, I think we're all frustrated by that, right? And specifically here, what we're talking about is things like Google saying, due to privacy, we need to reduce the number of searches that we're going to show in a report. So this statement was made at the beginning of September. We've heard about it. But smart people see, like Google is basically saying, well, from seeing 98% of search terms to about 78% overnight. The metrics on the right side of the chart, this is Matt Woodrow, another PPC expert, and he's basically showing that for some of his accounts, he went from in the blue, not seeing about 4%, 3.46% of search terms being hidden. And then overnight, Google makes this change, it goes to 37% in some cases. And so this is obviously very frustrating, but it's a reality that's happening. And this is because of privacy reasons. It's a little bit difficult to sorry, it seems like there's still audio problems. The other reason why data is being taken away is actually very interesting. I think many times the advertisers are very bad at math. And I'm not blaming any one of you. I'm very bad at math as well. And actually, it's more about statistics, right? People have a hard time sometimes making sense of the numbers. And the first reason of this is that when you talk about really small numbers, you get the law of small numbers. Google often says to us advertisers that we should not have too granular structure in our accounts. And part of the reason for that is that they think that if we have very small ad groups with just a few keywords, or maybe even just one keyword, it's very likely that on an automation, maybe that ad group gets 5 clicks and 1 conversion. Okay, so it looks like it's a 20% conversion rate in 1 month. And then the next month, those same 5 clicks have 0 conversions. And so now you think you've had a huge drop in conversions from 20% to 0%. But actually, if you put that in the bigger context of the whole account, it would be a very small number, right? Because we all know 5 clicks. I mean, what can you really tell from that? So that's part of the problem. And Google doesn't want advertisers to get too granular, because a lot of advertisers, they will call up the support and they will say, hey, why was there such a big change? Why is smart bidding not working well? Why did it go from giving me 20% conversion rate to 0% conversion rate? Now, most of you are probably smart enough to not, make that false assumption, but that's part of the reason why Google doesn't really like small granular structures. And then the other reason, numbers can be misleading. So about 18 months ago, Google removed average position from all the reports. And that was in part because that is a misleading number. An average number is by nature misleading because it includes data from a lot of individual actions. And when we think about average position, you can get an average position of 1.5 by being kind of in a mix between position 1 and 2, both of these positions above the search results. Or you could also have an average position of 1.5 by being in the top position, number 1, most of the time, but sometimes you're in position number 4, below the search results, for example. And so the problem is that advertisers really care about being above the search results, because those are the positions that are really the most visible. But if you just give someone an average position number, that doesn't really tell you anything about absolute top position, position above the search results. And so Google said, let's give people more specific data, but that also meant taking away an old piece of data that we maybe were used to using and optimizing with. And then the third point about, advertisers being bad at math is I just want to throw it out there. Oftentimes when we think about automation, advertisers are fighting against automation and they don't really value their time correctly. And this was a story from me talking to a product manager at Google, and he was basically lamenting the fact that advertisers would come to him and they would complain about how broad match and close variants were working so badly. And he would say, well, tell me more about it. And they would say, well, yeah, we saw all these search terms that were just not really relevant to our business. And then he said, well, tell me, how many clicks did you get for these? And they were like, well, actually, we got a lot of impressions, but very few clicks, almost no clicks. And then he said, oh, that's interesting. So you spent what, how many hours? 5 hours looking for these search terms to save $2. That's absolutely the wrong way to value your time, right? Don't fight automation to find $2 of wasted spend when you could have used your human time to go and do a conversion rate optimization, to maybe do a more strategic project, to think more holistically about the campaign. That would have been the better way to value your time, right? So that also goes down to being bad at math. And then the other point, the reason why the data is being reduced fundamentally is that once we use machine learning is a bit of a black box, right? It's this story that you can show the machine learning a series of pictures, and some of these pictures are cats and some of them are dogs, and you can ask the computer to say, is this a cat or a dog? The computer can often tell you whether it's a cat or a dog, but if you ask, why did you think this was a cat, or why was this a dog? It doesn't know, right? It has no notion of what a cat or a dog is. It's just that machine learning, the path that it goes through, it finds certain signals, and based on those signals, it says, okay, well, based on history, this is more likely to be a cat or a dog, but it can't explain to you really the difference between the two. And when that comes to PPC, it can actually lead to these horrible cases where if you trust machine learning to do your bidding for you, imagine that one day your conversion rate drops. And so the machine learning system says, oh, the conversion rate is down, so we need to lower the bid to keep you on your target cost per acquisition. And that seems fair. But then the next thing is you look at, why did the conversion rate drop? Oh, because the web team actually changed the landing page, and the landing page was performing really badly. So was it the right answer to lower the bids? No, absolutely not. The right answer would have been to fix the landing page, and the conversion rate would have been normal again, right? And that's the problem with machine learning and black box, is that sometimes you just don't get the actual data about what's causing the shift, right? You just get these decisions without justifications, and that can be very problematic, and that's going to be an opportunity for us. Right. And ultimately, we can all agree that this human intuition still matters very, very much. So here are some examples of close variants where Google says that an exact match keyword like flower arrangement actually has the same meaning, they think, as arranging flowers. Now, I would argue that if somebody searches for flower arrangement, they're most likely looking to purchase it from a florist. If, on the other hand, somebody is looking for arranging flowers, they may be looking for a YouTube video because they want to do it themselves. Clearly, there's a high difference in the commercial value of these two searches, even though they kind of mean the same thing, but to us, not really. And we can understand that. And it gets even more egregious. Google, we've seen cases where they think logo design is a close variant of trademarking, right? These are completely different terms. They're kind of in the same realm, but that's the problem. You and me as humans, we can see that and we could act on that. And I'll show you a script in just a bit to help you with that. Okay. And the third truth that we have about this whole shift towards automation is that advertiser controls are being reduced. And that kind of makes sense, because if you see that automation is gaining and Google is giving us less data, well, then in many cases, like in this self-driving car, it doesn't even make sense to have a steering wheel, because what are you going to do with a steering wheel if you have no inputs about what you might want to change? Now it's all about gut feeling. But really, a big reason that the engines would want to take away the steering wheel from the car of PPC, and have us do fewer things ourselves, is that automations oftentimes work much better when there's a very controlled and very set environment where they can control everything. The world is a messy place. If we can make the world a little bit less of a messy place, automation works much better. And so you see there on the left side, there's a straight road. It's very well defined. The line is clear. It works really well for a self-driving car. If you think about that in terms of PPC, these are your fully automated campaign types, like smart bidding, smart shopping, performance max campaigns, just a smart campaign, which is the new version of Express. All of these are very clearly defined. And think about that search term that I had on the last page for a second, right? So trademarking, and logo design. While they may be somewhat related, and Google, if you give them full control, they can actually do a good job because they know how closely these two are related. So they find a close variant and they have control over the bidding. So they set a much lower bid for one of these things because they say it might convert, but maybe not as likely as some of the other search terms. And now things are fine because you still hit your cost per acquisition target. But if you're on the side on the right, which is the messy world where the humans sometimes still has to make decisions and things are less clear, if you forgot to do a search terms analysis, now that really poor close variant is basically going to have the same bid as all of your other search terms. And that bid could be much too high. And that's when advertisers get frustrated. So Google, in many ways, actually prefers having all the control because once they control everything, they can actually be much more certain that the results will be good. So anyway, we get more automation, less data, and fewer controls. So that leaves us with Google saying it's advertising that works for everyone. And that's really what Google wants to do. Google just wants to pull more advertisers on the system and make sure that they see good results and they stick around and they keep advertising. But for us on this call, we're PPC experts, we're digital marketing experts. And for us, this is actually a bad thing because what it means is there's more competition. The cost per click prices in the auction go up, right? And so then it leads to that huge question, if everything's becoming automated and it's inevitable that we're going to continue down that path, how do we stand out? Is there a point of us continuing to do PPC? And I think there actually is. And that's because of the fourth truth. The fourth truth is that we've seen that automation works far better when you add humans to the mix. And so let me give you an example that's not from PPC, and then we'll come back to digital marketing in a minute. But so Garry Kasparov, he was the grandmaster of chess. And in 1997, IBM says we're going to build a deep blue chess playing computer, and that chess playing computer is going to be the best chess player in the world. Now, a couple of weeks before the match, the engineers figure out that the machine is actually not going to be able to beat Garry Kasparov. It's just not going to work. They've run simulations. It's not going to work, but they want to win. And so what do? They say, actually, we've defined the problem incorrectly. We've been trying to build the best chess playing computer, but in fact, all we need to do is beat Garry Kasparov. So if we go back to the drawing board and we redesign the system to beat Garry Kasparov, we're going to win that match. And then the media is still going to say that we have the best chess playing computer, when in fact, that computer probably couldn't win against a lot of other human players. And so Garry Kasparov gets beaten. He finds out about all of this. He's not very happy, but he starts researching this. And one thing he comes away with is that actually, if you have a strong human player using a relatively weak laptop, that is almost no match for the supercomputer. And that's really encouraging to me because if you think about all of us, we are strong digital marketers. And we all have relatively weak computers. We have a laptop, we have a desktop, right? These are good machines, but they're not supercomputers. But that actually can still beat the supercomputer by itself. So my point is, if you have a competitor who's fully relying on the supercomputer of Google versus you, the expert, with a couple of cool tools like Excel, like maybe Optmyzr or whatever it is you use, but you have that assistive technology, you're going to do far better. So let's talk about the assistive technology for a second. There's the story from PayPal. PayPal was going to go out of business. By the way, we all know what PayPal is, right? Payments. So, but they were going to go out of business because they had a huge problem with fraudulent activity. And so they were trying to fix the fraud problem by having humans review all the transactions. But they kept losing money because the humans were too slow to look at the volume of transactions that were happening, and too much fraud was still going through the system. And then they said, we're going to get really aggressive and we're going to use computers to automatically flag fraud. And it was bad again because the computers were too aggressive. Too many good transactions were being blocked. And so the humans on PayPal, they were not happy. They said this is not a good payment system because many times, like, it's a legitimate transaction, but the system says it's fraudulent. So what they did is they built a new system. It's called Igor. Because they had a big problem with a Russian hacker called Igor. He was responsible for a lot of the fraud, but they built a system called Igor, and Igor was using computers to prioritize likely fraudulent transactions, give those to the human team, and now the human team could quickly review a much smaller set of transactions. When they did that as a solution, as opposed to just humans or just machines, but when they combined humans and machines together, it was the first quarter in PayPal's history. They didn't have a fraud problem, and they actually became profitable, and they were able to continue as a business. So what does that mean for PPC? Well, in PPC, I think we can think of ourselves as playing 3 human roles: the doctor, the pilot, and the teacher. And let me explain each of these. So as the PPC doctor, think about what doctors do. They look at medicine, they look at prescriptions, they understand what is the patient's problem, what are they trying to achieve, and what is the course of action that likely fixes that problem, right? So one of the things the doctor does when they prescribe medicine is they have to prevent bad interactions. And we have to do the same thing. Think in PPC for a second about switching from manual bidding to smart bidding. That's great. But what if you haven't given any thought to how you do conversion tracking and attribution, and say that you're still using last click attribution? If you do last click attribution, it means you're only valuing the thing at the bottom of the funnel, so that purchase level. And by the way, I'm sorry, I'm just realizing that a lot of these animations are not working, so I'm going to have to explain a bit more. But basically, it only values the purchase. That's last click attribution. That means that the computer, when it looks at what bids to set, it's going to completely devalue the upper funnel or the early consumer journey stages. And if you do that, if you stop valuing the early stages that eventually lead someone to make a purchase, then you're basically closing your funnel, and you're going to have fewer sales over time because you're no longer engaging people very early on. And so some people then say, well, is that really a problem? Well, let me give you a very specific example. Say that you're Adidas. Okay, and somebody comes in and does a search for sneakers. And now that person realizes that Adidas has some pretty cool sneakers, and they start searching for more specific versions, specific sizes, specific colorway, and eventually they make the purchase for that sneaker. So in a report, that's going to say that all the purchases happen for very specific types of sneakers. Very few purchases happen on the keyword sneakers itself. If a human looks at that sheet and says, should we bid down for sneakers because it has very few conversions? Well, somebody from Adidas is going to say, well, no, absolutely not, because a large part of our business is sneakers. So we're going to keep that keyword bid pretty high, pretty active. The computer, on the other hand, it doesn't have the context. It doesn't really know what your business is all about. So if you used last click attribution, it's simply going to say that the keyword sneakers doesn't matter, and it's going to almost get rid of it, maybe to the point where that keyword stops running. So that wouldn't be good. And then also, if you think about it, how do you differentiate yourself versus someone who's just using automation from Google? Well, the PPC doctor has to look at a range of medicines. Like, do you want to be really aggressive in how you pursue things? Do you have very specific goals? And this is a chart that shows you smart bidding, or actually these are bid management types. But look at how many types of smart bidding exist. And by the way, what's the difference between smart bidding and automated bidding? Okay, so if you don't really know PPC, you're going to probably pick the wrong type of automated bidding. And then you might be spending your time setting bid adjustments. As you can see, a lot of these bid adjustments don't work with automated bidding or smart bidding, but some of them do, right? So if you know these details, these interactions, you're going to be much more successful. And by the way, if you want this chart, it's on the Optmyzr blog. And what is the difference between smart and automated bidding? Because I did bring that up. Smart bidding is auction time bidding. That means every single time a search happens, Google is calculating a real-time bid for that specific scenario. Automated bidding just calculates a new CPC, usually about once a day, and it puts that in. But for the rest of the day, that keyword runs with that bid. Next day, it gets recalculated, but it's not auction time bidding, so it's much less specific. Okay, so that's the doctor. As the PPC pilot, well, what do you do? What does a pilot do, by the way? A pilot, on average, flies a plane 11 minutes every flight. The rest of the time, the machine is in charge. But the pilot is monitoring the systems. The pilot makes sure that the altitude gauges seem correct, that the velocity gauges seem correct. If one of the inputs to the system is broken, the pilot can take corrective action. So that's a big part of their role. Now, to do that effectively, you need dashboards. You need the cockpit with all the information being given to you. When you equate that to PPC, think about you wanting to do experiments. Say that you're thinking about enabling smart bidding, but you say, maybe I want to run an experiment first so I can see if it actually does work for my account. That's all good and well. Google has a great framework for that, but they make it really difficult to see all of the experiments you're doing across a variety of accounts. Literally, for every account that you have to go to a specific page about the experiments. And to really know if the experiment is doing well, you have to click into each experiment. So that's a lot of time that you can spend checking in on experiments. That's not efficient. I've built a script. You can grab it from the code and the URL at the bottom. That script takes all of the experiments in your whole MCC account and puts them all together on a single Google spreadsheet. And it even includes the specific data. So now you could literally check in every single day to see how your experiments are doing, because it's all on a nice dashboard. Whereas if you didn't have this sort of automation, if you were just an average advertiser, you would probably check in on your experiments maybe one time a week, because it just takes so much time. This makes it much faster. This unlevels the playing field for you. Okay, and then also think about pilots. They follow a very strict process, and that's what makes them successful. That's what makes them safe flyers. And this is back to Gary Kasparov and a quick point, but he also said, if you have a weak human with a better process, they may be far superior to a strong human with a weak process. So just because you're great at PPC doesn't mean you can rest on your laurels, but also think about the process. Be very consistent with the process. And that's also going to help you grow your business. It's going to help you scale to other people on your team. And it's interesting because you can set the process for them, and you can hire someone who's fresh out of school. If you give them a really good process, they could actually do an amazing job managing your PPC accounts. The third role is the one of the PPC teacher. Keep in mind, machine learning, which is sort of the fundamental technology of all this automation, machine learning has the word learning in it. So something or someone has to teach the machine. Us as humans, we can teach the machine. So if we do smart bidding, does that really mean that we set one target and we walk away and we never look at that target again? Well, no, absolutely not, because the only thing that smart bidding does is it uses predicted conversion rates to set the right cost per click based on our cost per acquisition goal. It's a very simple mathematical thing it does. Now, it does it based on a tremendous number of inputs, but it's fairly basic in terms of what it's actually trying to achieve. What it is not looking at is what is happening with your business. Are you running special promotions? Are you expecting a huge difference in conversion rate because of that? That is something we can teach it to give the machine an edge so that it's just a little bit quicker. And it doesn't have to learn everything by itself, but you already tell it, well, this is likely to happen, so just go and do that for me. Okay. So now there's two new things that I've recently been thinking about. So two new ways to unlevel the playing field. And my first, after I wrote the book, I was like, well, all this work that humans have to do to help the machines be better is actually very, very time consuming. And I don't like spending a lot of time on things. I want it to be automated. And then I thought, well, actually, when you say humans plus machines are better than machines alone, maybe that's not the real equation. Maybe the equation is more to do with the fact that the machine is Google and Google does what it wants to do. And the human is the one who controls a little bit what Google does. Right? But we don't have to do that as a human. We can teach a robot, we can write a script, we can automate something to do that on our behalfs. And so that's the whole notion of automation layering, is use tools, use technology to be the thing that oversees the big machine learning from Google. And so as a simple example, say Google may be doing smart bidding for you, but that doesn't mean that you as a human can't set up a couple of alerts, a couple of monitoring systems that are scripts-based, that are automation-based, but that will tell you if the automation from Google goes outside of a certain bounds of what you think is reasonable. And at the very least, now you know to go and to take a look at smart bidding, because maybe something's been broken and you need to go and fix that. All right, so that's how the two become better together. And then when I talked about the pilot role, I was very much thinking about the role of a commercial pilot who keeps everybody on the plane very, very safe. Well, what if you think about being a fighter pilot and you actually want to take down your competition? Okay, well, there's a couple of ways, and here's 5 ways you can use that I'll cover very quickly so we can do a few questions. The 5 ways to be the fighter pilot. So nowadays, we're in the unfortunate situation where we have the pandemic. The pandemic is really changing the world not being so flat anymore. So it used to be that whatever country I would go to and speak at, there's always a Starbucks. Guaranteed. There's always a Starbucks. The world was becoming a very consistent place. But now, no matter where I go, there may be a Starbucks, but it may not be open in a certain city or in a certain state or in a certain country because of restrictions due to COVID. And what I was thinking was, well, there's actually geo anomalies now, right? So there's things that are happening very quickly at very regional levels because of the pandemic, or it could be because of other reasons as well outside of the pandemic. But here's a script, and it will highlight specific regions where performance has become unusual, right? Maybe there's a big snowstorm in New York, and all of a sudden people are not going into the stores and buying camping gear, but maybe they're buying winter jackets, right? There's a huge spike in something. I don't know that because I live in California. I'm not paying that much attention to New York. Here's a script, and you can grab it from that URL. It's going to give you an edge because it's going to tell you something weird's happening in this city. You might want to go and take a look at it. And maybe it means pausing the campaign. Maybe it means changing the text. Maybe it means doing something with bids. You have that decision, right? But you get the edge because you know faster than your competitor. The other thing that we saw with COVID was strange search terms. So in the travel industry, all of a sudden when COVID hit, everybody was looking for cancel my trip. A lot of advertisers actually didn't have negative keywords for canceling a trip because it wasn't a big deal. That usually didn't show up as a big part of search volume. But COVID hits, and all of a sudden, a travel advertiser who, by the way, is no longer doing business now, is having to spend money on all these clicks for canceling the trip. That is a huge waste of money. And now to figure that out, to know which search terms are rising and which ones are declining in my account, that's hugely manual. It requires quite a few steps, and you can see them on the left. Well, luckily, there are scripts, and here's an example script from Niels Roymans. So with this sort of a script, it can automatically populate a spreadsheet and tell you your rising and your declining search terms. And then based on that, you can do things like add new keywords, make negative keywords. It gives you an edge because you're not just relying on the averages and waiting for the system to catch on to something, but you're proactively going after it. The third tactic is automation layering to implement complex strategies. So when we think about shopping campaigns, and specifically smart shopping campaigns, Google never said you can only have a single smart shopping campaign with a single target. In fact, they say you should have multiple smart shopping campaigns, each with their own target that's kind of related to the margin and the profitability of that campaign, of that range of products. And so if you're an average advertiser and you put one smart shopping campaign with a target ROAS that's kind of close to what you need to have as a business, that's fine. You're going to get good results. But your high performers are going to subsidize your low performers, and it's a portfolio effect, right? You're not really maximizing to the nth degree. Now, as a smarter advertiser, you say, hey, maybe I just have 2 shopping campaigns, or maybe 5 shopping campaigns, or however many you can handle. Use automation to help you manage more. But basically, we're just going to group the products across a range of different smart shopping campaigns, give each a target. And if we have really good tools and technology, maybe we can even look at them on a daily basis and shift products between the different campaigns with the different target ROASs so that we get better performance, right? So that gives you an edge and you become the fighter pilot. And then we've talked about close variants, right? So we've lamented the fact that Google thinks some search terms are closely related to what my exact match keyword was, and that's problematic. And again, this slide is missing a few builds, so I'll just talk through it. But basically, think about your exact match keyword in the middle of the circle. In the beginning, that was exactly defined as what you could show on. The job of machine learning is to build a bigger circle around that and score every search term for how related it is to the original exact match keyword. And so in the beginning, it's green because it's still closely related, and then it becomes a little bit more red because it's not that close anymore. Now, what Google does is they basically set a threshold. That's that big red line. And they say anything that's within this red line, we could qualify and show your ad for it because we think it's close enough. But what if you, as the advertiser, you want to be more conservative? You don't like them being in that red, so you want to bring the circle closer again. Well, that's the type of stuff you, as a smart PPC fighter pilot, can do by using a little bit of technology. So here's a script. You can grab it from what I've written. But basically, it puts all of your search terms for close variants next to the exact match keywords. Now you can do an analysis that looks purely at the numbers. You can say if the close variant significantly underperforms the underlying keyword, then I want to make it a negative. Or you can do something more fancy, like take a Levenshtein distance calculation. Now, if you don't know what that is, look it up. I've blogged about it, but Levenshtein distance calculation basically calculates how different is the keyword from the search term by number of characters. So I like it when it's 1 or 2 of Levenshtein distance. It's 1 or 2 changes between the words, because it's usually just a typo. Typos are great. But if it's more than 3 of a Levenshtein distance, then I say it's probably actually a completely different word. And that's where I want to be a bit more cautious. That's where I want to monitor what Google is doing much more closely. And then finally, even if you're going to be using automated bidding from Google, or smart bidding more specifically, that depends on having a certain conversion volume. Now, Google can actually do a fine job without conversions. They've just introduced that with shopping, smart shopping campaigns. They don't even need to know about your conversions, because the machine has just become so smart that it just looks at other advertisers to figure out what your conversions will be, which is kind of crazy. But we can all fundamentally agree that if the machine knows my conversions, it's going to do a better job bidding for me than if it was just making some assumptions based on other advertisers. So you can write little automations, and here's one we've done in Optmyzr, but we basically look at what is the conversion volume for campaigns on different types of bid management types. If we go above a certain number of conversions, then maybe we suggest switching to a more sophisticated bidding algorithm. If we go below a certain number of conversions, maybe we say, well, we should manage it manually again until we build up enough conversion volume to where we feel comfortable that the machine from Google can do a good job with it. So ultimately, what this all leaves us with is that we need to think about complementing, not competing with the machines. This was said by Hal Varian, Google's chief economist at the time I was working with him, but this was really in context of Google Analytics. When Google purchased Urchin, so I was involved in the acquisition of Urchin. So Urchin was a small company in San Diego. We bought them and we turned it into Google Analytics. So everyone who was in the analytics world at the time was very afraid, because they thought we were going to put them out of business by making Google Analytics a free product. But Hal Varian said, don't worry about it. Google is making it plentiful. Google is making it free. There's going to be a lot of opportunity around that, right? It may sound simple to some people, but actually the more that people have access to machine learning and automation and PPC, that just means more people are going to have questions. People are going to need doctors to explain what's happening, pilots to monitor the systems, and teachers to give those machines a better input to get better results without wasting a lot of money. And that's the opportunity for us. So thank you for joining. Thanks for putting up with the technical troubles. And let me take a look at some of the questions and see what I can answer. So this first question is about, is Google's reduction of search terms really due to privacy? You know, listen, I used to work at Google, so I tend to believe that what they say, take it at face value. There are actually ways that you could take search terms and combine them in the back if you're fairly sophisticated to start building a picture of what users are doing. So I do believe there are some privacy concerns with that. And as we all know, Google is always under investigation for privacy, and GDPR, and California now has a Consumer Privacy Act. So I do believe that, but I think Google could have done a better job of giving us some alternatives, right? There are probably ways that they could make the data a little bit more obscured so that we still understand what is it that people are typing in, and we can make negative keywords. So one technique we've seen is use n-grams. Look at unigrams, bigrams, trigrams, and statistically speaking, some of the things that Google has removed from what we can now see in the search terms, it's still going to show up in the n-grams. So you might still at least get some ideas. And I wish that Google would do a better job of kind of like feeding us that sort of data. Somebody wants to have a fifth truth that, can we all agree that automation is still pretty bad? So I don't necessarily agree, but I'm also coming at it from the United States and English-speaking perspective. And so I think one of the benefits that Google has in those markets is that there's a tremendous amount of data. Absolutely. I've heard that automation does not work quite as well, and especially like close variants and that type of stuff, in different languages. And again, I'm from Belgium originally, so I assume Dutch being a fairly small language, that it does not work quite as well. But overall, I think they've actually made huge strides in terms of automation. And in some cases, it does work quite well. The other thing is that sometimes it doesn't work well because people haven't really put themselves in the position of the doctor, and they haven't really done all of the prerequisites necessarily to make sure those campaigns are successful once they switch onto automation. And that's really one of the things that Optmyzr is trying to do, is have audits, have reports, have alerts, the types of things that allow you to test automation and take the benefit of the time savings, but still remain in control at some level that the average advertiser probably won't. So there's a question about Google Analytics 4. Can we say data controlling? Yeah, so I don't understand exactly what the question is, but Google Analytics 4. So I think Google Analytics 4 is fantastic because one of the mistakes that advertisers do sometimes make when they switch over to more automation is they forget to teach the machine to be the teacher. And one way that you can teach the machine is to give it better information about what you really care about for a conversion, right? So in a simple example, if you sell mortgage loans, bank loans, somebody fills out a form that they're interested, that might be a conversion, but what you really care about as the bank is, did somebody actually get the loan and become a customer of ours? That's a much later conversion. So that may take a long time to happen. It may be outside of the 90-day conversion window when Google allows us to update offline conversions. But thanks to something like Google Analytics 4, we can now automatically find events that happen to those users with certain G-CLIDs. And based on that, we can say, well, this customer, even though they haven't gone down to the final stage of what we want them to do, they seem to be doing some of the right things. They're going down the right path. So this is a higher value conversion, probably, than this other one, which hasn't done any of the things, any of the events that we think they should have gone through by this stage of the cycle, right? So I think that's where Google Analytics 4 is going to be very powerful. And absolutely, you need to use it, and you need to really think about how you define goals, conversions, how you feed them back into Google, and which of these goals you allow them to use for automated bidding, because that's a decision you have to make as well. It's not just because you put a conversion into Google that you've given them permission to use that towards automated bidding. Next question, how to distribute the marketing budget through the funnel. Yeah, okay, so I think it has more to do. Okay, so the funnel, I said, don't use last click attribution, right? But then the question becomes, what is it that you should be using? If you think about position-based, which is giving a lot of credit to the first interaction and the last interaction, that is generally the way to kind of like split your budget, even though you're not using budget controls, but you're kind of putting your budget towards early interaction and late interaction, which is really good if you want to be aggressive about building a brand. So if you don't necessarily have a big brand and you need that early exposure to get people to know that you exist, then I would do position-based. If you're kind of hesitant, then I would say use time decay. So time decay gives a little bit of value in the beginning and then progressively more as it gets closer to the conversion. And that is actually the closest to last click attribution, but without making some of the fundamental mistakes that last click attribution works. And so this, it sets different value for each of these stages. And so by extension, it will then try to prioritize those keywords at those stages. So it kind of splits your budget between those. You could do something much more sophisticated, which is have a specific campaign for early stage touch points. But it just gets more complicated because now you have to manage a lot of negative keywords. But I'm sure that would be a great field on leveling and fighter pilot tactic because it's advanced and it's certainly going to give you an advantage. Question, we have many ad groups with few keywords to improve quality score. Yes, quality score. Many of them have low volume. No, so the question is, if you have SCAG, for example, so single keyword ad groups, would you recommend combining those to do better with automation? Absolutely not. So the way that the automation machine learning model works is it looks at the query and it looks at the conversion as you've defined it. And it looks at that regardless of your structure. So it does not care about the structure. And in fact, if you have single keyword ad groups because you wanted to improve quality score, that's fantastic, because you've actually already done one of the most important pieces, which is drive that high relevance, the high click-through rate, right? And then presumably you've done a good job too, putting in specific landing pages that are going to be really good at converting when that user was searching for a very specific thing. So you should actually do pretty well. And again, the reason Google says you should not have these small granular structures is because they worry that you're going to look at that one ad group and think it's broken, right? That one ad group is getting a cost per acquisition of 100 euros when you said it should be 20. But you lose sight of the fact that that one ad group is part of a much broader campaign, and that campaign is probably getting the results that you want it to, right? So that's kind of why Google says go to consolidation. But when you're an expert, it's fine to keep it pretty granular. And then what's my prediction of the future? Do we think that Google is going to smart campaignify everything? Yeah, I mean, at some level, right? I mean, I think they love sticking the word smart in front of everything these days, and the more automation, the better. And sort of to the point that I was making, that if you're an average advertiser and you only use 1 or 2 automations, that presents problems, because the things you haven't automated, those will be the things that break, right? So Google, for the average advertiser, absolutely wants to say, just let us do everything, and we're going to do a far better job than you, who don't know anything about digital marketing, right? But for us as experts, my hope is that we retain some level of control. But I also think that as we lose control over like managing inside of the bubble of AdWords, we're going to start managing at the periphery of AdWords, right? So we might be managing the ad texts that we feed in. We might be managing the conversion tracking and the attribution models that feed into the big black box of Google, right? So it's just going to be a little bit of a shift of, we're not going to manage the keyword, but we're going to manage the conversion tracking, which is going to inform the system that chooses the keyword, what is the right keyword to choose. Right. So there's going to be a shift, and I think we are on a path where it's going to continue. And we're just going to have to think about how that means we evolve our personal PPC roles. And then the question comes, so automated advertising is kind of a B2C thing. Should we as B2B companies jump in before it's too late? I think B2B companies actually can take huge advantage of audiences. And a lot of this audience capability is driven by machine learning and Google finding similar audiences. So yeah, I mean, I would certainly jump in and try some of these things, but then again, think about conversion tracking. And as a B2B company, you probably have a longer sales funnel. So tell Google when that initial interaction happened and the customer seemed likely to buy from you, but now that they need 6 weeks to decide on a huge B2B order, keep tracking that through events, right? And keep informing Google, is this looking like it's going down the right path, or is it not going down the right path? And by the way, you could update offline conversion tracking for the same GCL ID every 4 hours if you wanted to, right? Every 4 hours, if you know something more about what that prospective client was doing, inform Google. That way, their smart algorithms can say, okay, we're going to find more customers that had these same attributes as that person who's going down the right path. We're going to set better bids because we sort of understand the value. Is that going to be a high, a very profitable enterprise client, or is that going to be a B2B client, but maybe, you know, a small business not spending so much money? So I think all of these things are kind of connected. And then we have the last question. So thanks for all the questions. These have been great. So is learning data science going to be an essential skill? And what are the essential skills that you should learn? I mean, I think a fundamental understanding of data science is probably helpful. By the way, if you can get a degree in data science and machine learning and artificial intelligence, like those are the high value jobs, right? But I think it's going to put you a little bit more at the periphery of marketing. And I don't want to say those are necessary skills, because I think there's still many things we can do that don't require that deep data science knowledge, that deep statistical knowledge, but at least understand how the systems work so that you can be a better teacher to it. You can understand what are the things that maybe the machine could benefit from learning. So if you asked me 3 years ago, I probably would have said, yes, you should be a data scientist, you should be an engineer. nowadays I'm much more muted in that respect, and I think there are many opportunities where you can still be a traditional marketer. And in fact, traditional marketing and thinking about campaigns in their entirety and being more holistic is probably a bigger deal now that we don't have to worry about managing every single keyword, every single bid, right? So that's fundamentally the shift that we see. So yeah, thanks everyone for watching, for the great questions, and